So, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a conversation with four experienced responsive classroom educators and presenters. And our goal for tonight is to share the joys of teaching using responsive classroom and the joy of teaching with keeping social emotional learning in mind. This is just a good time of year to kind of reconnect with the why we do what we do and to connect with the joy that it brings for us. My name is Carrie O'Grady. I am a full-time consultant for the Responsive Classroom Approach, which means I get to go around to different cities and countries and states to share the responsive classroom approach. I'm up to 44 states now of being able to share responsive classroom. And I absolutely love doing it because I was a classroom teacher. I taught in Fairfax County Public Schools, which is a large district in Northern Virginia, a DC suburb, for 15 years. And I used the responsive classroom approach as an educator, and it just made me feel like a happier teacher and a more effective teacher. And so I love sharing it with others. And that's what we're here to do tonight. I will be leading a lot of the conversations, and Lori will be leading them too. And this is really a conversation between four educators. And we were hoping it would be a conversation that you will join in with. Please use the chat feature. Please feel free to make connections, ask questions. The four of us, will be trying to keep an eye on that, but talk to each other. You know, when we share something and you have an example that you've experienced, add it to that chat feature so it can be a bigger conversation. And now Lori's going to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Lori Bousquet, and I've been teaching for 44 years. Currently, I teach in the education department at Le Moyne College in Syracuse. Of those 44 years, I've been a consulting teacher for 30 years. So like Carrie, I have had many opportunities to travel and meet incredible educators who are so committed to creating safe and joyful classrooms for their students. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the responsive classroom, since it is the approach that has most transformed my teaching. Responsive classroom is really an approach to teaching and discipline, and it focuses on four domains of teaching: engaging academics, positive community, effective management, and developmentally responsive teaching. It has been identified by CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, as a, quote, high quality, evidence-based, well-designed classroom program that systematically promotes students' social and emotional competence, provides opportunities for practice, and offers multi-year programming. So responsive classroom is an approach that we can implement grades pre-K through 8th grade. And we have workshops at both levels. A little bit of history about the responsive classroom. The approach began in 1981 with a group of public school educators, many of whom Carrie and I have had the privilege of working with. And they recognize that academic and social learning go hand in hand, and that truly optimal learning will happen when teachers teach positive social skills while teaching academics and integrate the two. So, you know, they drew upon the best practices in education, and they began to articulate really practical, concrete strategies to integrate academic and social emotional learning throughout the entire school day. The great thing is, in the years since, our responsive classroom developers continually refine not only the teaching practices, but how we deliver professional development to teachers, to instructional leaders, to administrators, and to school district officials. And so, you know, we are part of that you are all part of the history of the responsive classroom now that you're joining us. And I would like you to meet another incredible responsive classroom educator, Ellie.
Thank you so much. I was listening so intently, I forgot I was on mute. I'm Ellie Cornicelli. I am the Director of Professional Development and Engagement for Fly 5. So I have come to Responsive Classroom, in the way that many of you all have. I went to a training, I got hooked on it, and I was in the classroom for about 15 years. Working as an art educator, and much to Carrie's leadership in the district, Responsive Classroom was brought to my district. I taught in Fairfax County as well, and then had an opportunity to come to CRS and work in a fellowship in the programs department. And from there, I went on to get into Fly 5, which is a brand new kid on the block. RC has been around for a long time. And so Fly 5 is now the new program that is coming out. And we just have had our first year out this past year. So we are a K through 8 curriculum, and we are an explicit teaching of SEL skills. So whereas Responsive Classroom is very much an approach where you teach through strategies, through practices that are going to foster that social emotional growth for students and for teachers. In this program, in the curriculum, it's really a time where it's an explicit teaching of that specific skill. And it really is developed and continues to be refined through the 4 domains. So the 4 domains that Lori just mentioned: developmentally responsive teaching, effective management, positive community, and what's my last one? Engaging academics. Thank you. Just making sure you're paying attention. So through all of those domains, we continue to develop the program, refine the program, and really make sure that that's an integral part of the, the way that we bring the components to the teachers through digital and print components, the way that we have developed the standards to make sure they're developmentally responsive for every age and stage. And so it's really an exciting time to be a part of that, because we are brand new. We are, as I said, just completed our first year. And so it's really exciting to see how this, as Lori mentioned, this lab school that started, in 1981 has now become a foundation for a whole nother program that we're really excited about how it's going to impact teachers and students. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Amber.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Hello, everyone. I am Amber Searles, and I am a curriculum and instructional designer for the Center for Responsive Schools. Just like Ellie, I went to the training. I was really intrigued with the training. I went through teaching the non-traditional way. So I knew that something was missing, but I did not know that missing piece. But when the responsive classroom training came to our school, I really, really caught on to it. It was just like an aha moment for me. And I began to teach during the summers part-time for present the responsive classroom curriculum, middle school curriculum in the summers. And I was brought on as Ellie in the teacher fellowship program as well. And now I am focusing on the middle school aspect of it. And I am a full-time curriculum and instructional designer. And for me, what that looks like, I really, really study the interest of middle school students. And when we talk about middle school students for responsive classroom, we're talking about the young adolescents, ages 11 to 14. And we know that these students, the middle school students, they have a certain interest that elementary doesn't have. They have a different mindset. Their brains are rewiring in middle school. So that's what I mainly do. I create the workshops, some of the resources for it, and we also continue to do our research. We just don't stop. We continue to go inside of schools to see what is new in schools, what students are going through in school, so that we can be relevant as it relates to the middle school student. So I'm excited to be a part of this panel, a part of this panelist in this wonderful conversation. And I'm ready, Carrie, whenever you are.
Thanks, Amber. As listening to you all, it was just great to hear the history of Responsive Classroom and how it has grown and how it's developed into middle school and our sister companion of Fly Five. And again, this is a conversation with teachers who love Responsive Classroom and thinking about social emotional learning. And again, please feel free to chime in on the chat. Feel free to connect, introduce yourself. Can tell us where you are, what you teach, what brought you to this session. And to get us started, my first question is, so we've all taught the Responsive Classroom approach. We've all used the Responsive Classroom approach. What's your favorite part? What's one of your favorite parts of either the workshop or the approach? And I'm going to ask that Amber start us off on that conversation.
And Carrie, before we begin, I see some Q&A coming in that the chat is disabled. So if you can enable that chat for us, we can interact with our participants. And you are on mute.
Thank you so much for those of you who put it in the chat feature or put in the Q&A. And while you chat, I'll figure out how to enable it. I'll try.
Sounds good. Hang tight, you guys, and thank you for letting us know. We really appreciate it. But my favorite part about Responsive Classroom, especially in the middle school portion of it, the favorite content I like to teach is small group learning. And some may say, why small group learning? We already do small group learning. I have found in presenting small group learning and also observing teachers doing small group learning, we could actually take it a step further with our students with small group learning. Thinking about partnering them purposefully and not just saying, all right, get in your favorite group. Because we know, speaking in middle school and in elementary, if a teacher tells you to find a group, who are you going to go to? You're going to go to your best friend. And if you go to your best friends, A, you're probably not going to get anything done. And B, you're going to be talking off track and you're not going to learn anything new. And also, it's not excluding anyone. Think about that student that doesn't have that doesn't like to take risk, to actually ask people. So if we as facilitators in our classroom allow students, we plan purposefully of how students are in groups, we can build their confidence, and we can also go back, it builds their SEL skills as well, especially when it comes to talking to others that we don't know. And these SEL skills are lifelong skills. And I often say during this section, when I teach this content, sometimes we may or may not want to work with others, but sometimes we may have to, and our students will get into those situations as well. Remember, with Responsive Classroom, we want to teach our students how to be successful, not only in school, but out of school as well. So we need to give them these skills that they need for small group learning. We need to help motivate them, to help them grow. And also the use of teacher language. That one is great across the board, elementary, middle. Teacher language, because it's power. I know this sounds so cliche, but it's the truth. It's power in our words. When we think about, if each one of you all think about, you were in a classroom, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or college. Think about words that inspired you from a teacher or words that discouraged you from a teacher. Those things can live inside of you for years. And we don't want those negative thoughts planted inside of our students. And it's a way that we talk to each other as well. Remember, we're mentors in the classroom. The way we talk to students is the way it will roll off and they will communicate with each other. So I could go on and on about my favorite content about responsive classroom, but my top two is small group learning and teacher language caring.
And I think just to piggyback off of what you're saying, Amber, it gets back to what we started talking about at the beginning of our conversation, is the why behind all of that, right? So yes, those are practical. Yes, they are things that are going to strengthen those connections. But I think the real heart of this practice, of this approach, and what keeps us all coming back for more is that it gets to the heart of why we want to be teachers in the first place. We want to connect. We want to teach students how to be successful in and out of the classroom. And so that really is kind of as we say, the warm, gooey center of, what RC and Fly 5 are really about. So I am giving you a connection symbol virtually.
To piggyback on what Ellie just said, my favorite part of the workshop to learn and to teach is the section on teacher empathy, because as Ellie was saying, it really does get to the heart of why we became teachers in the first place. And the piece on teacher empathy, it aligns so closely with so many teachers' value systems. We went into teaching because we believe that our kids can become productive, caring members of classroom communities. And we also know that just like adults, they're going to make mistakes sometimes. And we need to make sure that we make our classroom a place that's safe for mistakes, and that we can let students know that we hear them and that we understand them. And one of the reasons I believe that it really permeates everything. And one of the reasons I love teaching it is because I can see the lights go on in participants' eyes when they hear about it. I can see that, they are so dedicated, so committed to making sure that in our approach, we are honoring our kids, understanding their feelings, and knowing and also teaching them the appropriate behavior. So that part will always be top in my heart.
And I do want to add to that when you mentioned, Lori, teacher empathy. It is so important because so often in the hustle, bustle, and busyness of the school day, school year, the time of the year, we don't take the time out to think, I make mistakes. Why can't I give them the opportunity to fix their mistakes? So, and we were all children at one time. And I always think about when I was in the classroom, and now when I teach the responsive classroom middle school workshop, how would I want to be treated? How does it feel when someone calls me out on the carpet? And just think about how, as adults, we can control those emotions sometimes, but students don't know how to control those emotions. And with responsive classroom, the good thing about it is with every practice, with every strategy, it's allowing students to practice those social skills, going back to the cares, cooperation, assertiveness, responsibility, empathy, self-control. They need to practice those things. We've had years to practice them as an adult, right? But our students haven't. And if we don't give them the opportunity or the space to practice those skills, when will they be able to practice those skills? I think sometimes we're caught up in our content area that we so often forget about those emotional areas and how to take care of our students and how to maintain that positive classroom community.
And Amber, I was connecting, you were saying that, as us adults, we've had a lot of time to practice and we still struggle all the time.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And our, brain is fully developed and we've had lots of practice. And according to my mother, I was brought up right and I still struggle. So, just having that empathy, I think is such a key part that, Lori, I'm so glad you brought that up. So I looked into the chat feature. Our organization has it set that we don't allow chat in the way it's set, and I can't change that right now. But I believe I opened up the question to be, I think I hit the right buttons on that everybody can see the Q&A. So if that's the case, please feel free to add to the Q&A and we'll keep an eye on that and share some of those thoughts. So we talked about, really our favorite parts of Responsive Classroom, our favorite parts of teaching. And Ellie, thinking about what you shared, how can that content really help the teachers be prepared?
So in thinking about being prepared, so as Amber said, in the hustle bustle of the day, as we have so many initiatives to help students with academically, really staying, focused on that social and emotional growth is also a big part of success in and out of the classroom. I know as we were thinking about our favorite parts, and I know earlier, Carrie, you had mentioned teacher language. I know that's a real, I have a real love for teacher language as well, because I think it is such a, it's a game changer. It just is such a game changer. It helps to change your mindset. It helps to, and it's, what is really nice about it is contagious. So, as you hear it in your colleagues and you hear it in your leadership, it becomes just the way that you frame your language, frame your thinking around students. So as we think about being prepared and, through the workshop, I think one of the things that I think about the most is having a growth mindset. So having the mindset of just being, having the courage to be new at something and having the courage to try it. And maybe when you first try out a strategy or practice, that it is going to be a work in progress, and it is going to be something that you're going to have to fumble and learn. And as you take those first steps. So I think growth mindset, having that, as we talked before, having that empathy for students and yourself, that you are going to, take on something new that honestly, when we started it in my school, and it might be similar to you all, we chipped away at it. We really did a focus every year for several years that really helped us to take off those bite-sized pieces. So I think I would just give a kind of more global answer of just saying growth mindset and having, some grace for yourself around trying those new things.
And Ellie, I think that is very important. You have to have grace. And so many people, we're all eager when we leave the workshop or leave any workshop. I want to do it. I want to do it. But you have to give yourself some grace. Start slow, and be the model that you want to model in your classroom. It's not all going to come at one time, and take it in chunks. Grab, just like we're sharing our favorite aspect of the workshop, think about your favorite aspect of that which you participated in the workshop, and start with that. Once you start with something that you know and you feel comfortable with, it would make it easy to weave in the other practices and strategies. you won't feel so busy, or I have to do this, or I have to do that, or I must do that. It'll come natural because it's something that you want to take away and start in your classroom.
So I think we're moving into talking about implementation. Lori, do you want to lead us into that conversation?
Sure. Let's talk about implementation. What tips or advice would you give to novice teachers who would be interested in utilizing responsive classroom and learning more about responsive classroom? And we'll ask Ellie to take this one.
I'm going to somewhat repeat what I just said, but I really do think having educators around you who have similar goals around RC is really, or responsive classroom, is really helpful. I was really fortunate to be in a group of teachers that had a really similar vision for what we wanted our school to be like and what we wanted students to experience in our school. And so having for lack of a better word, accountability partners, mentors, people around you that are really going to keep you true to your word on, what you really want to focus on and work on. Another thing was, I mentioned teacher language. As we focused on that, we all had in our school these little cards that we put on our, on our name badges. Something as simple as that doesn't take a lot of effort, but, really working on chipping away at those different kinds of language and having those sentence stems. It was a great way, a simple way to keep that at the forefront of our minds so that we could change something that's as deeply ingrained as language, which is really difficult to do. So I think, prioritizing what's really important to you and the people around you, and having some people that you can go and, model after. I had some really amazing teachers that I was able to just learn from just by hearing them talk in the hallway and see how they structured and, organized and connected with students, even in community spaces. So I would say any and all of those would be good.
Amber, do you have anything to add to that?
I think just take it. Going back to what I said before, taking something that you really, when you go inside the workshop, taking something that you really like and starting off with that, that is key. When you start off with something that you like, you're going to take hold to it and you're going to want to take it and run with it. And with these responsive classroom practices, especially for novice teachers, they're so easy to implement. And just as Ellie said, if you want to work on teacher language, it's simple as putting those sentence starters on your lanyard. It can be as simple as that. Once we work on our language, we'll get excited and want to move on to something else. So yes, I totally agree.
For me, what really helped when I first learned responsive classroom was to plan my morning meetings really deliberately. And because when I took that time and really thought out, like, what are my social emotional goals? What are my academic goals? When am I going to loop in referring back to the rules? What am I going to model? It allowed me to just start that day with, okay, I'm going to do it all right for 20 minutes, and then see how it will feed out to the rest of the day. But really putting in my plans, I'm going to interactive model here. I'm going to refer to the classroom rules here. I'm going to use my reinforcing language here, and to plan just a 20-minute block that deliberately helped me practice those skills.
And Carrie, with you mentioning morning meeting, it's the same thing with the responsive advisory meeting. And that's a great start as well. And what I used to do in middle school, because we all know that middle schoolers think they know it all. You can ask them, what are your likes or dislikes? But just kind of listen to their conversations, listen how they interact, and think about how can we improve their interactions with each other and allow allow them to practice that through responsive advisory meeting, through a controlled and structured environment. And students won't even know what you're doing. They'll just know that it's benefiting them, like, oh, wow, I've been in this situation before. So it's very useful to also not spy, but just listen to your students, because your students will give you what you need, what practice you need to practice, or what strategies you need for them to practice. So let them be your partner when it goes to implementing the responsive classroom practices.
And actually, along those lines, what was really helpful for me in the beginning was becoming really aware of developmental milestones in our students' lives and how they change throughout the year. I hadn't really been changing up the format of how my kids sat. I basically had thought they were the same kids coming in September and the same kids were leaving in May, and that wasn't true. And so the book Yardsticks was a huge bonus for me, because I needed to see where are my kids so that I could do that kind of planning, that careful planning that Carrie and Amber are both talking about, because you're right, planning is such a big part of making sure that whether we're teaching social skills, whether we are planning our morning meeting, whether we are doing an interactive model, we need to know where our kids are before we can try and lead them somewhere else, right? So development is a big piece of that. All of you are now experienced teachers and very experienced responsive classroom teachers. So I'm wondering what advice you would give to an experienced teacher who is learning responsive classroom and continually refining their practice.
So first, Lori, what I would tell teachers, sometimes when they're in the workshop, sometimes it's like, I may know this. Or experienced teachers may say that, and that's true. If you are an experienced teacher, that is true. But we're just putting names on things that you already do in your classroom so that you can implement, so that you can be cognitive, aware of what you're saying, the practices that you're implementing in your classroom. And when I present, I always tell my teachers, my educators, you all already do this, but we're just giving you the research behind it. We're giving you the why behind it and how it connects back to our 4 domains and our 4 guiding, not 4 guiding principles, but our 6 guiding principles. And we're just constantly making those connections. And when I'm often in workshops, teachers are like, oh, those experienced teachers, they're always like, oh yeah, that is, I try this in my classroom, when I tried this in my classroom. And then they can give that experience that they've done with the novice teachers. And they're giving the novice teachers information, some things that they may want to consider or tweak when they're doing these practices. And also, peer observations are so important. In our classroom, sometimes we can be so stuck in our own world, saying, I know this, I got this. But so many times when I've had peer observations, when they've said certain things or asked certain questions, it's like, oh yeah, I did forget that. So it's very important to get feedback from your colleagues. And it's coming from, and honestly, the peer observation, and you can do as simple as this. What I did in my classroom, I would ask teachers, do you have time to come in my classroom to hear my teacher language, to see how my RAM is going? Please don't look at me as an expert. what can I do to always improve myself? So as an experienced teacher, what I'm saying is you also have to have that growth mindset. And with that growth mindset, we can't be selfish and saying, I don't, because it's not all about us. It's not all about us. If you're in the workshop or if you're implementing these practices, you're doing it for your students. So you're just building your classroom environment structured around those 4 domains, structured around those cares, structured around those guiding principles, and also the core belief. And you're just weaving it in there. So that's what I would tell an experienced teacher. And also set a goal for yourself. It's always, growth is good for everyone. Just like we tell our students to set a SMART goal in middle school or hopes and dreams in elementary, we can do the same thing for ourselves. What do we want our students to get out of what we're going to teach them with weaving these responsive classroom practices and strategies into our content?
I also want to mention a great resource for experienced teachers is we have something called a Certified Responsive Classroom Educator. And so Ellie, if you don't mind putting that, she's going to put that link in the Q&A. So if you have taken the core course and the advanced course, you can apply to become a certified responsive classroom educator. And that is really us putting our gold stamp on you, that you have shown that you have been able to use these practices to fidelity. And the benefits of that is that you really become that school leader, that teacher leader, or school leader that really is that model for your school, lead those book talks, be that model classroom. And it helps. And then you also become part of a smaller cohort of people who are also certified educators. And so then there's conversation with those folks too. So if you're interested and if you're at that level of experience and you're ready for that next step, that's the place for you to go.
And Carrie, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And if you're not ready, or if you are teetering, we do have a responsive classroom assessment tool book. And that is for middle school and for elementary. And you can even do it while you're doing your RC educator certification. That is a great baseline to see where you are with your practices. And going back to the peer observations, your peers will know exactly what to look for if you ask them to come in to observe you as well. So those 2 books, we have one specifically for elementary, and we also have the assessment tool specifically for middle as well.
I want to apologize. I'm not able to get into the chat, and I'm not able to post it in the Q&A there. So I'm sorry about that, everyone. It is on the RC website. If you go in, there's a little search bar up there. And if you type in certification, it does pop up. So I'm sorry, I can't share that with you all, but it is there pretty easily in the website. So hopefully you can get to it. I did want to just mention one thing as Amber and Carrie were talking about. It's kind of reminding me of zooming out. So, looking at those big 4 domains, the kind of global and overarching big ideas that really encompass all of the practices. I think that's also a great way to get deeper into why we're doing what we're doing through this approach and through the Fly 5 curriculum as well. That is a backbone of the way that we develop the program. It's through those 4 domains, and it helps to give you a getting back to the why, getting back to what are we really trying to do for students. We're trying to help them be a part of a community, to be engaged cognitively, socially, and emotionally, to have, those developmentally responsive standards in the Fly 5 approach is how we do that. And also that, students really feel like they have that belonging and significance. So I think those 4 domains really help to make sure that you're staying engaged with the why, the big idea that motivates you behind RC.
Thank you, Ellie. Before I ask another question, I'd like to answer a question that is in the chat, and that is about what is the responsive classroom core belief? And we really believe that in order for our kids to be successful in school and in life, they need to learn a set of social and emotional competencies and academic competencies. And the social and emotional competencies are the care skills that we talked about earlier: cooperation, assertiveness, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. So we believe that those need to be taught, modeled, and practiced just like any other skill. We believe the same thing about our academic competencies, which are academic mindset, perseverance, learning strategies, and academic behaviors. And in the workshops, we kind of break those apart, and we talk about ways that we teach these skills. And we spend 4 days working on that together. So for my next question, I'm going to ask what advice you all would give to school leaders, because I know you've all worked with school leaders. I've worked with school leaders as well. What advice would you give them for their responsive classroom journey and the journey at their own schools?
I'd love to share some thoughts on that because I have had an opportunity to work with a lot of school leaders, and that's really one of my favorite parts of the work, is helping leaders think about how this can be a school-wide approach. And the way I joined into Responsive Classroom full-time was actually coordinating the study that UVA, University of Virginia, did on the effectiveness of responsive classroom by Dr. Sarah Rim Kaufman. And one of the clearest findings that came out of that study is that when teachers felt that their principals were bought in, that there was greater implementation of the practices. And she really, Dr. Sarah Rim Kaufman really pushed on what do you mean by buy-in? And the key was that you're there with us, that you're learning with us. And so if you're a school leader and you're sending your teachers to the workshops, if you can attend to is the biggest thing that you can do, and fully participate. And I know how hard that is, because these, workshops are often, that time where you're hiring new teachers and putting out fires. But I call it that, you're the chief learner, you're the chief teacher, you're really modeling what that looks like. And then when it comes to implementing the practices, that you're being vulnerable and saying, okay, I'm going to try an interactive model, bring your class to the cafeteria. I want to interactive model what it looks like. Give me feedback, and so then you're supporting your teachers because they're seeing another interactive model, and you're supporting your students because you're making those expectations more clear. So going with your teachers and learning and practicing with your teachers these new strategies. Trying to use your teacher language when working with students. Another tip that I would recommend is that Amber brought up the importance of peer observation, and that really helped my teaching, helped me grow so much. And it wasn't a strategy that I didn't use for many years until I had a principal who came and said, here's the time, here's who's going to cover you, here's your time to debrief. And so before, I'd always have principals who would say, oh, you can observe whenever you want, you can observe where you ever want. And I know they meant that I could, but it would fall into my list of 100 other things I needed to do that day. And so as a leader, if you could put in the time, the coverage, and the time for them to debrief, and 15 minutes of observation is plenty. that they don't have to observe all day. They can go in with one window of something to look at. Like, I want you to listen to how many times I reinforce my students and what words I use in these 15 minutes. And, take note of that and then have time to debrief it.
Just made me think, Carrie, as you're saying that, it's about removing barriers too. So if you take care of those logistics for teachers, you're removing the barrier that they have to do it themselves. So I think that's also just, an aha for me about, what are some other ways for school leaders to seek out, what are other barriers that are keeping people from trying new things or keeping people from really buying in? And maybe, it might be different for every school community, but that would be something to think about.
And I will give an example of what our school used. When we came out of the responsive classroom workshop, as a leader, our leader set the standard for us. He would often, when we first came out of the workshop, and he noticed that some weren't implementing in their classroom. So responsive classroom came back to our school to do another workshop. And this time he had non-negotiables that teachers had to do. And one of these non-negotiables that he wanted to see in everyone's classroom was the responsive advisory meeting. And he made sure that everyone had 20 minutes of responsive advisory meetings every day, so that there wouldn't be any teachers to say, well, I don't have time. He kind of nipped that in the bud as, here it is. I'm giving you the time now. This is what I want to see. This is what I want to see if I'm going inside the classroom. Just like just one non-negotiable. And also, he also practiced it during our staff meetings, so that going back to what Carrie said about the cafeteria, the principal is modeling it for the students, but they're also modeling it for the staff. So if I'm holding you accountable to it, I'm going to hold myself accountable to it as well. So it's about school leaders being that example as well, and taking the workshops very seriously to help not only teachers, but students as well. Because the end part is wanting our students to be successful in school and out of school.
Thanks. And Lori, thank you for noticing those questions in the Q&A and answering that. And also I want to say thank you to my colleague Jane, who is with us and added in the link to becoming a certified responsive classroom educator. Jane, I might be asking for more help as I bet you thought you were just attending, but I'm going to be using your wonderful resources here. The other question that I just want to make sure that we answered is the question was that they were very new to responsive classroom, and what is responsive classroom. And so I just want to make sure that we define that again. And then Jane, if you'd be kind enough to put a link into there, that would just link us to just the beginning of the responsive classroom that gives us that core information. But again, responsive classroom is an approach to teaching, and I'm emphasizing that word approach. It's really how we teach, and it's how we teach that blends the social, emotional, and academic together. And it's really knowing that the key is that if our students need these skills, that we need to model, teach, practice, and reinforce. We're not just telling them. So we would never say to our students, you need to double-digit divide. If double-digit division was a skill that we were supposed to teach, we would model it. We would give them, base 10 materials to see what it looks like to break up a large number. We would give them whiteboards to practice with partners. We'd give them graph paper to line it up. We would play games. We do all that to learn double-digit division. But we do say to students, you need to show self-control. You need to manage your time. And showing self-control and managing your time is harder than double-digit division. So we need to teach, model, and practice and reinforce those skills just as much as any others. And so it's that the academics and the social emotional go hand in hand, and that we have to be constantly thinking about those. Another thing that I noticed in the chat feature is someone mentioning the book Yardsticks. And that is connecting to what Lori said about the importance of knowing child development, what's typical at different ages. And so that is a resource that was written by one of our founders, Chip Wood, and it is in its 3rd edition, and you can find that on our website. And oh, thank you. I see that Jane added the All About Responsive Classroom. And someone else mentioned that we have a YouTube video. And so if you are one of those people that really like to see it, not just read about it, that's a great place to go. Another great question is, where can I find example of practices being implemented for special area teachers? Jane, you've got another job. We have a great book called Responsive Classroom in Special Areas, and it really just takes all the practices and shows how they can use it. As I mentioned these books, I also want to mention that whenever we publish a book, we have articles that come out about it. We take excerpts of the book and put it on the website. So if you, like me, have a stack this heavy by my bedside of books that I want to read, you could always put in, if you just want to get a little bit about teacher language, you could put that into our search engine and you can get some articles around it. And then you could decide whether you're ready to invest into reading a whole book about it. As we move on, the other folks in our group, and Jane, thanks for joining us too virtually. If you could keep an eye on those questions, I certainly want to make sure that I get those covered and answered. But to move on, my question for you all is, how has the presenting and the teaching of Responsive Classroom, how has it helped you in your own professional growth? And Amber, do you mind getting us started on that conversation?
I sure will. So with my professional growth, presenting it and I'm talking from an angle of presenting and also the impact. Every time I present this workshop, this middle school workshop, I learn something new. And I learn something new from other educators as well. I always get it from different angles. And they help me think about it as a curriculum and instructional designer. When they're giving these ideas and their inputs professionally, it helps me. All right, this is what teachers need to know. These are the things that teachers need to know. These are the things that if I present or write an article or workshop, this is something that I want teachers to really engage in and get out of. And also professionally, what we practice and what we teach in our workshops, we try so hard to do it within our work environment. We don't only present this, but as an organization as a whole, we live it through and with our colleagues. And it's a great way to be aware of others' feelings. And it's a great way to see how others' aspects. And it just really helped my professional growth. It really helps me cognitively and thinking when I have those professional conversations with my colleagues, school leaders, or other teachers as well.
Sorry, there's a dog barking here, but it's not mine, so sorry. To piggyback off of what you're saying, Amber, I think that, it has a far reach. I think that as we spend our time really thinking about these competencies deeply and what they really mean. You know, Carrie, you mentioned earlier, adults work on them too. I always say the airport's the best place to see everyone's social emotional competence really, you know, coming to the surface. And so I think it's important for me to also think about teachers and how do teachers really start to live out these competencies. And like you said, Carrie, earlier, it doesn't come naturally. You know, some people have more of a tendency to be more empathetic or to be more cooperative, you know, with personality or just with natural strengths. But there are real skills in there that really do need practice, reinforcement, and reflection around, you know, how you can get better. So I think coming from it as an adult perspective, you know, you always have room to grow. You always have more to learn about perspective taking, about goal setting, about, you know, social responsibility, about being a person that can lead a group or follow in a group. You know, those are all things that we practice as adults too. So I think that's very meaningful for me to see those skills. You know, and in our curriculum, I always say, you know, we look at the 8th grade skills, we say, oh yeah, we can definitely relate to those as adults, but even some of the kindergarten skills, welcoming others to join in, sharing, you know, like you think, okay, well, we should have that, but sometimes it's harder than other times. And so I think it's important to reflect on that from an adult perspective that, you know, there's always room for growth, and that's always something that we can work on.
I want to thank you all so much for spending the evening with us and letting us, you know, share about our learning through a responsive classroom. I want to mention that if you're interested in more, whether it's more workshops, more resources, more conversations, the best place to go to is our website, responsiveclassroom.org. And it has everything that you need, all the connections, you know, to the books, to the workshops, to support for administrators, supports for teachers. And, you know, please, there's places to connect and ask for, you know, people to reach back out to you. Please feel free to utilize that. And then I especially want to thank Amber and Lori and Ellie for being here tonight and sharing your perspective. And Jane, thank you for helping with the technical end. And hope those of you who are still, if you're not on a traditional school schedule, that you enjoy the rest of your summer and have a wonderful and safe beginning of your school year. And please, again, reach out to us. And again, thank you for being here.